Hello, everyone. Welcome to our narrative series workshop, a personal statement workshop series. Today, we will be starting with session one. This event is planned by our program committee from the Korean American Scholarship Foundation, and we are so excited to bring you this programming since we understand a lot of you are college students that could be utilizing an event for this for professional development to help you prepare your college applications, post-grad applications, such as that. And without further ado, we're so excited to get started. So starting off, my name is Juntae Rocker. I will be your moderator for this session as well as future sessions for the Narrative Workshop series. I am a support program support specialist, mouthful, for the Korean American Scholarship Foundation, as well as a volunteer for the National Program Committee. I graduated from Pennsylvania State University Schreier Honors College with a double BA in Asian Studies and Korean. I'm also a four-time KSF scholarship recipient, so I've been with the organization for many, many years now and many more years to come. I'll just briefly explain the structure of this session as well as the narrative series workshop. You guys have agreed to this, 3 sessions across 3 weeks. We hope each session will be led and facilitated by professional and student affairs, editing and publishing and communications. And this is like what I talked about to help build your story ground up for college and graduate admissions. We expect that you take away not only real and practical lessons on discovering your own personal story, but we also want to be practical so you guys have a refined draft to apply moving forward. To go more into what KSF is, we are the Korean American Scholarship Foundation. For 56 years, we have awarded grants to uh, support undergraduate and graduate students, high school students, and Korean War veteran descendants in their education. Our organization was founded in 1969 by a small group of Korean American leaders who wanted to really promote higher education for our community. So they gave a few $100s of their own money to establish the first few KSF scholarships. And then over a 56-year legacy, we have awarded 14.1 million to over 8,470 students in that capacity. And then we also have an impressive $6.0 million endowment. In the effort to explore new possibilities in our events, it is with great pleasure and elation that we present the debut of this workshop. So we are so excited to have you guys here. We also have our social media linked here on the slide. So we really encourage you guys to follow us, our Facebook, our Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Before we begin, here's a quick explanation of the waterfall method. This will be used for our icebreaker that's coming up right after this. This is something we'll be utilizing to ask questions and receive answers in an efficient manner. The speaker, so I, will ask a question and give you guys time to think and type out your answers, but don't submit it just yet. Once I say waterfall, that would be the cue for everyone to submit their answers at the same time. Once we give you the prompt, we'll give you 2 minutes. And this is really something that you shouldn't think too much about, just whatever comes up in your mind first, really not too much brain power. This method will help everyone stay on track with time and ensure that all participants get a chance to answer all questions. So this is our icebreaker for today. Before we start with the session, this is the icebreaker question. So a name has many meanings. What does your name speak about your identity? We want you to think about your answer, type out your answer, and then wait. Please don't submit it in the chat just yet. And then once I say waterfall after 2 minutes, that is when you can flood the chat with all your answers. And then, I think I can go over some of the answers. We also gave a couple guiding questions. Did your parents name you after someone? Do you share the same name with someone you admire? And does your name spark something in your identity? So I will set a timer for 2 minutes. And if you guys can prepare your answers, and then once I say waterfall, if everyone can prepare to submit their answers in the chat, that would be great. Also, while we are waiting, we encourage you guys to keep your camera on. We are recording this session for those that aren't able to make it. And obviously, we would love to see your faces. We'll also be taking a group photo at the end, so that's really when we encourage everyone to turn their camera on, unless you're uncomfortable, just so we can see your faces, take that group photo, and you know, we have a little bit of time left, 30 seconds. 10 seconds. All right, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Waterfall. All right, let me see these responses. Loving these answers. Honestly, I should have also typed an answer thinking about it now. Um, my name means finding something beautiful. My parents named me with the legacy name. My full name means messenger angel, named after my grandfather. Uh, my name means wisdom and light. They thought of the easiest name that people could pronounce. My name symbolizes my family's values, and my sister named me Matt. All right. All right. Thank you guys so much for participating in this activity. I certainly enjoyed reading these answers. Obviously, regardless of whatever significance your name has, we're so glad to have you guys. So, jumping into it, thank you again for joining our narrative workshop series. Today's session, like I talked about, is session 1. This is the first session. It is about discovering and mapping your story, pre-writing, and story mapping. I will give a brief introduction of our speaker and facilitator for session 1, Angelina R. Jenkins, MA. So, Angelina Jenkins is a student affairs professional who has a background in managing and advising student organizations, program curriculum development with emphasis on cultural competency and identity development, and certified peer mentoring. Angelina and I actually go back to my college days where I met her, where she served as the program coordinator for a peer mentoring program geared toward first year and transfer campus students, as well as the people of color student population at Penn State, which is a predominantly white institution, before she became the assistant director of our cultural center on campus. With that, I will turn it back to Angelina Jenkins to start our session.
Thank you so much, Junte. It is so great to see you all. We're going to switch over gears really quickly. All right. Again, my name is Angelina Jenkins, and I'll dive a little bit further into who I am and how my story evolves, and really what does this mean for all of you who might be in those stages of preparing writing, but also thinking about if you are post-grad, job searching, and navigating what does it mean to actually share your story with others in a way that is not only meaningful, but also really provides an opportunity for others to get to know you in a way that is more than just, hi, my name is. And so today on our agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about why your story matters. I'll talk a little bit about my story and how I came into not only the positions that Junte has mentioned already, but really what it was like navigating higher education. I'll talk about what it means to reframe the narrative. What does your map actually look like? We'll practice story mapping a little bit with a guided handout, and then you'll also have some wrap up and homework. And so, why your story matters. Some things that I would love for you to keep in mind as we navigate this conversation today. Again, I recognize that some of you might be considering applying to colleges and what does really applying that personal narrative look like and starting that writing process. For those of you that are thinking about job searching or even how to apply to graduate school or to master's programs or postdoc programs, how are you really sharing who you are as a person? And I have 3 things that I would love you to keep in mind as we navigate our conversation today. The first is that your lived experience is enough. Your story matters, and it matters for a multitude of reasons. And the first and foremost is that your story is what creates a more comfortable environment. It allows people to connect to you, and it truly is the wealth of knowledge that others need to know about you. Storytelling is about truth. It's not about perfection. How you engage in storytelling and how you share your story is about you. It's meant to be the most authentic version of yourself while you share these pieces, not only to others about what you're involved in and what you may be engaging in and your passions, but it's meant to be all of the fun, chaotic, and sticky pieces of who you are. And then finally, authentic narratives connect deeply, not only with colleagues and colleges and employers, but they actually connect to the people themselves. That's who you're telling your story to. And that's why you always want to call it your story or your story mapping and not just your personal pitch or your personal narrative. And I want to start us off with this quote from Joanna Ho, who's the author of Eyes That Kiss in the Corner. We will never have a better world until all our stories are told. We will never have a better world until all of our histories are known. We will never have a better world until all of our voices are heard. And I hope that you keep that in mind as we navigate our stories today with each other. And so you might be thinking, where does my story begin? And to be very honest, my story begins in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I am originally from Western PA, from the city of Pittsburgh. But more often than that, when I share my story actually begins much more further than that. And so I always like to share my story and start off with my immigrant Korean mother who came to the United States in originally the late 70s, early 80s from Bucheon. And then also my Sicilian American father, who was also a first and a half generation American. Both of them, when I think about their stories, they come from two very different people with wildly different experiences and cultural nuances, but they also come from this shared understanding of what they wanted for their children, specifically what they wanted their children to experience in this world, and particularly what it meant for them to experience when it came to education. Growing up in the greater Pittsburgh region, while a beautiful city with a lot of opportunities, was not always easy, especially as a young racialized Asian American who was in predominantly white spaces. There's not a very strong Asian American or Korean American community at the time of which I was growing up in the city of Pittsburgh. And so trying to find places of belonging, of mentorship, of shared community was really not prominent or valued at the time that I was growing up in the city of Pittsburgh. When you add in having to figure out how do you apply for college, how are you navigating high school experiences, especially at a time where the Common App had not been created yet when I was applying to colleges. There really was no centralized experience to be able to say, you know, this is what you need to do in order to be successful in your application process, let alone how do you even navigate college as a first generation student. And so for me, recognizing that I was not in a position where I could have a high school counselor or a college counselor and navigating the college experience was really hidden behind a paywall. And only those who had privileged connections or were in school districts with financial resourcing really to prepare them for their studies for university. All of this was super daunting and how to figure out what are these next steps. There were not as many opportunities to engage with other people who looked like me, let alone with other folks who were navigating the first generation college student experience. And so trying to figure out what that really looked like honestly came down to having amazing friends who were older, who were also navigating that experience, who were also first generation college students, having conversations authentically with each other about what we were scared about, what we were worried about, how are we going to pay for college, what does the financial aid process look like. And ultimately, for me, this is how I ended up at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, also known as IUP. It is one of the original 14 state schools in the state of Pennsylvania, located roughly about an hour outside of the city of Pittsburgh. And with going to IUP, this brought so many new opportunities, curiosities, and growth that I truthfully could not have anticipated. I got to learn what it meant to be a student leader, an advocate, a community organizer. It's where I got to find my true connections and really build on my future career. It is at IUP where I learned what being an orientation leader during the summer times to help new students who are coming to our campus not only find their place, but receive academic advising could come from. Throughout the academic year, I got to serve in a role that was called a peer advisor at that time, where I got to help students who were navigating their classes just understand what it meant to be a student of color on campus at a predominantly white institution, but also just a first generation college student whose parents had never went to college, but also maybe they didn't have siblings who went to college. At IUP, I really got to understand what true leadership meant. I had the opportunity to join multitudes of organizations, including being able to be our Asian Studies president in my first year at university, to then being the co-creator of the Asian Studies Ambassadors program at IUP, and create an opportunity to link not only the academic experiences that we feel in the classroom, but also what does it mean to be an Asian American and an Asian student on a college campus with predominantly white students. I also had a really amazing opportunity to further dive into my leadership opportunities. And this came from joining a sorority within my undergraduate career, becoming our vice president of our chapter, also becoming a new member educator, where I got to continue to hone in these skills of what it meant to help others and actually serve a community larger than myself, but also be able to be a part of an experience where I could impart not only skills to others, but share my story and share their stories. And all the time while this is happening in the background, I was having conversations about what the next steps of my career would look like. I had gone through phases like many college students might go through where they changed their major or they realized that the major that they had been in just was not serving them anymore. And for me, I had known that psychology and Asian studies was something I was passionate about, but trying to also battle family expectations, familial expectations, ethnic expectations of going into business, I had finally decided that what I really ultimately wanted to do in the end was help people. I had felt a calling to knowing that there were people out there were students, there were families, there were parents who just needed additional help and had really started to go down two different paths. I had decided that throughout my junior and senior year of my collegiate years that I wanted to either go down this path of becoming an ecological psychologist, and so going down the path of getting a PsyD, or moving on to a master's in education or student affairs, and just really trying to grapple what did these next steps look like for me personally. Knowing that at home, I was a caretaker for my parents and for our family, but also really wanting to navigate this desire to help other people. And so as my story continued to unfold in my senior year, I started to have conversations with my mentors about understanding what it meant if I decided to go either into a doctorate of psychiatry or into just a master's, what it meant to be a first generation student. Once again, navigating the master's and graduate school application. How do I even navigate taking the GRE, which is very similar to the SATs and ACTs? I also had to figure out how to take the MCAT. And at that time, I ultimately decided after applying to about 4 different schools that I really had more of this passion of understanding how universities could impact college students, how administrative and university level working with students in areas like multicultural affairs, diversity, equity, inclusion, first year success and impact could really make a difference in my own story. And so I continued on and I got my master's and I started my master's degree in student affairs and higher education with an emphasis in counseling. I had awesome opportunities to do an internship at Auburn University in Alabama, where I got to work with other counselors and student advisors to create and co-create an experience for our first year students at Auburn to not only feel like that they could belong, but actually understand what this growth process could mean for them. From there, I was able to graduate with my master's and prepare for my first job post-master's. From there, that's actually how I met Junche. I got to work at Penn State University, University Park in central Pennsylvania, where I started my first role working with students of color at a historically white university, navigating not only what did it mean to be first-generation college students, what did it mean to have to create their stories in a place where they were not wanted, where they didn't feel like that they could belong, but also how to grow them into be engineers, into doctors, into artists, into marketing specialists. And what did that co-created experience really look like? And so while navigating higher education, did not necessarily stop at getting a master's and going to Penn State. It has actually now evolved into a story that is still being written. It has now moved on to me being a third year PhD student and really understanding what does it mean to work full time, doing a position that in our current time can be really hard in higher education. I currently oversee a cultural center at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I also oversee diversity, equity, and inclusion education for my campus. But I also have this awesome opportunity to continue to build my story with other people. What that has looked like has meant finding community post-graduation in a place where what did it actually mean to be a young Asian American professional, especially working in spaces that were still predominantly white and that were not Asian. It also meant moving away from home and now being the farthest that I am away, almost 5.5 hours away from my family, and starting once again to be in school as a first generation student, but now at what we call the terminal level as a PhD student, still navigating these spaces. It means that I've been able to work with incredible Asian Pacific Islander Disney American professionals like Doris Ching, who is in the photo on the bottom left, And Doris Chang is the first Asian and woman of color to be the president of NASPA, which is an international organization of student affairs and higher education professionals. And so I've gotten incredible opportunities to work with these people who not only look like me, but who have fostered this growth and this curiosity into my story. And so when I share aspects of who I am, it's not only where I've come from, it's not only those hardships, but it's really about this growth, the values, the passions, being able to take those into spaces further, being able to sit on a multitude of leadership teams through NASPA and the Asian Pacific Islander Knowledge Community. It has allowed me to navigate being the leading organizer of a day-long conference summit for Asian Pacific Islander Desi American graduate students and young professionals to further grow them in their professional development and understanding. Navigating these spaces still in my current time in my own journey as typically the only Asian American, let alone Korean American professional is still really hard. It's still an opportunity to feel like I can develop my story, share my story with others, but it's also allowed me to really hone in on who I am as a person. It's allowed me to self-reflect so that as I was navigating the PhD process, I could share my story in a way that was succinct so that to those who are reading my application, they could fully understand who I am, where I'm moving from, what my research areas, ideas are. And so my hope for you all, as you've listened to this and that you're engaging through reframing the narrative, which we'll do in a moment, is to truly understand that our stories are never finalized. They're never finished being written. My story is still continuing to be written. And sometimes it can be hard to focus that story. And so this is where reframing the narrative comes in. And so when you think about framing your narrative or reframing your narrative, I want you to think about it in a few different ways. Again, for those of you that are thinking about your college application soon, for those of you that are thinking about applying to master's or postdoc positions, even if you're meeting someone on the elevator and you're trying to do your elevator pitch, the biggest thing I want you to remember is that these statements, these stories, they're not just about struggle, they're about self-understanding. You're not just talking about your best qualities. These also include your passion points. Who are you as a person when you don't say, hi, my name is Angelina Jenkins. I use she, hers pronouns. I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Maryland. It's so much more than just that sentence. And what does that really mean for you? The other aspect I want you to think about is that you have to avoid deficit thinking. You're thinking more about your growth, the curiosity, your purpose, and your values. And some questions to kind of frame what that looks like really comes from these three moments. And so when you want to first start thinking about brainstorming, it comes from this first question. Describe a moment that changed your perspective. You might have had a light bulb moment in this last week where you thought, wow, like I really thought that I had this growth or this curiosity point that I wanted to talk about in my personal statement. But actually, I had this interaction with a friend that really made me think and change about that perspective. What does that look like for you? The second question or thinking point is what experience helped you grow into who you are today? If it wasn't for my amazing mentors while I was getting my bachelor's degree, for those that had really shown me that I could pursue working in higher education as a profession, as what we call a student affairs professional, working with students from a multitude of areas, and then ultimately now being the director of a cultural center. Had I not had those experiences, had I had not had those mentors or the moments like this attending a workshop, I wouldn't have been able to grow into the person I am today. And then another question I want you to consider is what story would you want someone to remember about you? The biggest thing that I hope that you get out of hearing me talk for the last 20 minutes about my own story is that I truly have just been someone who has wanted to help others. At the end of the day, that's what I want someone to remember about my own story. And so we're actually going to practice the waterfall moment, just like we did earlier with Junte. And I have this question for you. And I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to think about this. And then I'll say waterfall. And then once again, you'll go into the chat box and write your answers. But the question I have for you is what part of storytelling feels the hardest? And so again, I'll give you 2 minutes and I'll give you some time warnings and then I'll say waterfall. And again, as Junte said earlier, it doesn't have to be full sentences. It can be just a couple words. About another minute. There's about 30 seconds left. And then I'll say waterfall, about 30 seconds left before you can start putting your thoughts into the chat. All right, waterfall. Pull open the chat box. Thank you all so much for your responses. I'm seeing trying to make their story engaging, the right point to hone in on, a natural storytelling arc, feeling like your experiences aren't enough, sticking to the main purpose of the story without getting sidetracked. That can also be difficult for me sometimes too. Knowing how long of a time frame to take up, can be a hard one. An authentic way to share your story. I'm seeing a lot of responses that also say emphasizing certain impacts or passion points. And so we'll get to that actually in the next few minutes. And so some other pieces that I want you to also consider when you're doing your framing, again, whether it's a college application, if it's a personal narrative, if it is even just having a conversation with someone else. This might seem a little bit silly for those of you that are not doing a college application, but actually choosing a prompt that you understand is really important. That might seem redundant or it might seem silly, but genuinely, there are certain prompts where you'll receive where you feel a little bit more connected to versus others. And choosing a prompt that will actually guide you to the right personal narrative or reflection is really important. Again, are you highlighting your own self understanding? Are you showing these growth points? Are you showing your passion points? Are you showing really that storytelling arc that takes you from one point to another? Are you actually being invited to share an accomplishment? These are things that are important too. Like I mentioned earlier, you don't just want to focus on those deficit points. You want to actually show how you've gotten to a conclusion of either a goal or a piece, or even just thinking about how you've come to this certain point and who's impacted that. You actually want to think about how you're sharing that accomplishment. Again, you want to be wary of certain prompts, whether you have that connection to them or you don't. But you also want to make sure that you're wary of prompts that encourage you to express too controversial of an opinion or a topic, making sure that it's also relevant to others. And then the final piece that I'll give is also thinking about how can you make sure that you're fitting in either in that school, in that company, in that organization. Where are you highlighting where your values and your passions and your morals and your mission, your personal mission, also aligns with the mission of whoever you're talking to? To even further focus on this, I want you to consider your stories like a large map. All of these maps are important. Sometimes they lead us to the grocery store. Sometimes they lead us to our favorite department store. They might take us to our place of worship. All of them are beautiful and demonstrate different journeys and realities that are yours and yours alone. But sometimes we connect a little bit more deeply to one map or another. So when you're considering each of these maps, I want you to keep the following in mind. I'm going to show you a handout in just a few minutes that you'll see a little bit more of what this looks like. And so really, I want you to think about this in 3 different ways. Not one way is perfect. Not one way is the right way. These are just 3 different frameworks that I would like you to consider as you think about your story. And so the first is the growth map. You can think of this as your moments of change and discovery. And there's really 4 different ways that you can think about a growth map. It can start with the context, the actual pivotal moment, the action, and then the growth. The moments of growth are times that you overcame a challenge or you learned something important. It could be that experience that changed your perspective. I also want you to think about your values and your passions and these influences. So as we move further into these story maps, I want you to think about your values and what's deeply important to you. Where did those come from? Who did you learn them from? How did they shape who you are? Your passions, what excites you? Have you acted on that passion recently? And then the influences, people, places, events, music. How has that shaped who you are? And so again, starting with our growth story map, you're thinking about those moments of change and discovery. With growth, how did this experience shape who you are or what you value? Action. What steps did you take or choices did you make in response to that moment? The actual pivotal moment itself. What experience, opportunity, or shift sparked growth or new understanding for you? In context, where or when does your story begin? When you choose the growth story map as your framework, your story doesn't have to always start at the beginning. Like I shared, my story, yes, starts with me in Pittsburgh, but actually includes a whole wealth of knowledge and a whole wealth of stories that come from my parents that are included in my story. And so when I have the time and when I have the opportunity, I make sure to share that story because that's integral to who I am. Those are those pivotal moments that have shaped and sparked my understandings as who I am and who I walk in the world. It's how I've taken those actions to learn deeper into who my identities are really shaped by, how my identities shape who I am, how, as an Asian American who runs a cultural center on a campus that has the most Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander students on our campus, making sure that I'm leading in a cultural way, making sure I'm leading in a way that makes sense to the students that I serve. And how did that experience shape who I am? And so again, it doesn't have to start at the beginning, but if it makes sense to you and it fits into who you are as a person, it makes the most sense for you to share your story. That's where you start. The second framework that you can consider is known as the values-driven map, or also it's just centering who you are as a person. You're starting at your core value. What's a value that you live by? It could be family, it could be creativity, it could be persistence. How does that core value define your experiences? And so what experience revealed or strengthened that value? You might know of a really integral moment, whether it's through a sports team or through a student organization, where you felt like that value was challenged. How has that experience revealed or strengthened who you are as a person as well and reinforced that value? When you think about how it shaped you, you're considering the impact. How does this value guide your choices or your perspective? And then how do you live it now? What is that future connection? How are you going to continue to carry that value forward? What does that story look like for you? And then the third framework is the passion and impact map. This is also known as highlighting what you love. It starts from your passion and interest, what drives your excitement or your curiosity. Maybe you really love going to concerts, and that's something that has really shaped who you are, being able to connect with a specific musical genre, and that's helped you understand who you are more as a person. What does that development look like? How have you nurtured that interest? Are you spending time on it? Have you been able to say, I spend X amount of hours each week playing the violin, for example, and it's really shaped me as a person because it's taught me the value of hard work. It's taught me the value of continued persistence. What does that contribution look like to your story? What is that moment of contribution? When have you used it to make a difference? If you are someone who really enjoys community service, how has that been your passion point? And how have you actually used that to make a difference? Whether it's a community organizer who's working in a food kitchen, or maybe you're supporting a student organization by making a difference on your campus to help other first-gen students. How have you continued to nurture that interest, but also what are you doing with it? And then also finally, your future vision. How will you grow or share this passion moving forward? All three of these different story maps are not the answers to a prompt that might be asking you, can you tell me about a time in which you overcame something difficult? But instead, these story maps are to help you start brainstorming. They help you to start paint a bigger picture of more than just, hi, my name is. My hope is that by utilizing the story map, you're able to start figuring out, okay, where are the pieces of which I want to make sure someone else understands my passions? I know that for someone in the chat, they had mentioned that sometimes talking about their interests or their passions or what they want to highlight can kind of feel like putting on a show. And this is really where the impact of storytelling comes from, because it's something that you believe in, it's something that you believe to be authentic about yourself. But also, more importantly, going back to what I shared when we first started talking, is that your story matters. Your story contributes to a larger picture. And so, how you choose to share it is what makes it authentic. So what I want to introduce for a moment are a couple different prompts, and these are just prompt introductions. I would love you to just choose one. And again, you can keep these in mind as we continue to practice story mapping. On the handout that I'll show you in just a moment and that you'll receive in the chat, we'll also have some additional prompts that you might come across, especially for those of you that are applying either for college applications or for post-bachelor, so for master's or doctoral applications. What I'd love you to do now is just take a look at these prompts and just choose one to really focus on in the back of your mind. We'll practice story mapping in just a moment, but I would really love for you to just think through one of these prompts. And so there's prompt one, describe a time when you felt out of place and what did you learn about yourself? Prompt two, how is your identity? So that could be cultural, racial, socioeconomic, it could be your gender expression, influence your academic or professional journey? And if so, how? Prompt three, the lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to our later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, a setback, or failure. How did that affect you? And what did you learn from that experience? And then prompt four is really just if you have another prompt that might be more prominent for you because it could pertain to a certain application, please feel free to use that. And that will be your guide for the next portion of the session. So again, before we move slides, think through one of these prompts. All right. So what you're going to see come into the chat right now is a handout called Storytelling Map Guide. On the first page, it'll have everything that I just said, explaining the three different types of story mapping. So it'll walk you through again, what is the growth, what is the values, what is the passions. And then on the second page, it'll also have places where you can actually start brainstorming these three different areas. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. This is just an opportunity for you to start thinking through what makes the most sense for you when you're talking about who you are from a personal narrative standpoint, an introduction standpoint, college application standpoint. Being able to at least have the words down on paper will allow you to more succinctly flow. And in session two, you'll actually talk a little bit more about that essay writing. Oh, thank you, Juntae. And so what we'll do is for about the next 10 or so minutes, we're going to show again the handout so that you can see it. I'm here so that if you have any questions, if folks would like to have a little bit more one-on-one time and would like to ask a question about their story or about how to navigate their story, I think we have the opportunity to maybe do breakout rooms. And so what we'll do is I'll stop sharing my screen. Juntae will start sharing his. And then we'll give you about 10 minutes to start working on the story mapping. So again, this first page is just further explanation of the types of story maps. And then blank space of where you can work on them. And then the third page just has further prompts, which everyone can take a look at later. You'll also all be getting this via email so that you have it for your own personal record. But again, for right now, for roughly about the next 10 minutes, we're just going to focus on choosing a story mapping framework. And feel free to use the chat if you have questions. You're welcome to unmute yourself if you have any questions. In the chat box, I'll also be putting prompts 1, 2, and 3 again. And for those of you that are interested in prompt 4, again, prompt 4 is just choosing your own prompt, whether from an application that you're already currently working on or that you've seen from somewhere else.
I also just sent it out via email. So if you can look in your email and find it, I just sent it out. So you might be able to see that.
Thank you, Jenny. Hi, Rosa. I just saw that you joined us. What we're currently doing right now is just working on choosing a smart mapping framework. We're working on this for the next few minutes. You also should have gotten this in your email, so you're welcome to download the guidebook there. But I would love for you just to spend some time thinking through these different prompts and just brainstorming some answers to the questions. Hi, Hannah. I just saw your question come through in the chat. For those of you that might not have the chat open, Hannah just asked that if there's any advice in terms of creating a hook or starting these personal statements. And yes, we're also recording the session, so don't worry about missing the first half. For me personally, when I think about just starting to write a creative hook or start personal statements, I'm someone who just likes to brain dump. Even right now in my third year of my PhD, I always have a first document where I just start writing anything that kind of comes to mind, whether it's a question, for example, if I was looking at the growth map, when or where does my story begin? Whatever's the first thing that comes to mind is how I really just start writing. And then after I've written for a while and I think, okay, I'm at a point where I feel like I'm ready to stop, then I'll go back and I'll start to figure out how to actually make that more exciting. For me, when I'm in an interview and they always ask that dreaded question, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I don't start with, hi, my name is Angelina Jenkins and I use she, hers pronouns and I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Instead, I really do talk about my passion points. I more often than not start off with the fact that I am genuinely someone who enjoys being in the community of others, whether that's going to concerts or that's being at a coffee shop or being in a working group with other people that have like-minded values. And I start from that point and then I unweave my story, utilizing those passions and values. It might seem a little bit daunting when you're first really starting to do that hook, or you're thinking about your personal statement. But personally, I really do believe that you have to start at the point that makes the most authentic self to you. So whether that is that moment that you care most about, or whether that is that moment that really changed who you are as a person, whatever that looks like is where I personally like to start. Do you use vignettes in your writing? Would you give any advice on how to approach incorporating one into your essay? Oh, that's such a great question. I don't. For me personally, I don't. Only for the fact that in the type of writing that I'm doing in my PhD program, which in the second session we'll break down writing a little bit more, it's not something that is typically done. What I do like to do when I'm in the draft stages of my writing is I'll kind of create what is my overarching storyboard. So I like to use pictures. I like to use a whiteboard when I'm first really starting to write and just throw different words out there just to feel what makes the most sense for me. When I was starting to do my personal statement for my PhD, we actually are given a specific type of prompt. And in that prompt, it asks us to talk about a moment that really defines who we are as a person and the type of researcher we would like to be. And so when I saw the prompt for the first time, I actually took that moment to just write down on a whiteboard different words that first came to mind. And so I wrote down my parents' names, which was the first thing that came to mind. I wrote down different moments in my career that had really defined who I was as a person. I also wrote down dates and challenges that I felt with those. And so that is kind of more the approach of when I write essays or personal narratives, as I like to take the farthest step back from the actual question and then really narrow down in. Doing a time check, we'll spend about another couple minutes with story mapping. You're welcome, Elaine. Thank you for your question. And for those of you that have pulled up the guide, on the third page are just some additional prompts that you might come across. Particularly for those of you that are going through the college application process, these prompts have been redeveloped through a partner that I have in Ingenious, but also a college campus counselor. And so as you're thinking more about how you might utilize your stories and how you might answer some of these questions, there's some additional brainstorming opportunities with prompts on the third page of the guide. Take about another 2 minutes to think about your brainstorming maps. As you might start to wrap up your maps, I'm going to drop 3 questions into the chat that I would like you to think about. And if it helps to write down answers, you're more than welcome to respond in the chat. You're welcome to respond on your guides. But I would love you to think about what surprised you in your writing. Is there anything that came up as you started to think about maybe you chose values framework and centering who you are, and you're starting to think a little bit more about, oh yeah, like I have these really great values that I aspire to not only lead my life in, but also I would love others to see. And maybe that's coming up for you. What felt hard or easy to write about? I know when I was first starting to write about myself and having to say who I am to others, you always kind of get stuck on like my name, my major, where I'm from, and then trying to figure out anything else that comes after that just doesn't feel good. And so, what felt really hard or what felt really easy for you to respond to? And then the other question I would love you to think about is, what story are you starting to uncover? Maybe as you were thinking about passion framework and highlighting what you love, you really realized that there was a moment in the last year or two that has stuck to you, that drives your curiosity about others, about the community that you're in. And this is the story that you want to lead with as you write your personal statements, or these are the stories that you want to write about as you move forward in your applications. And so go ahead and take about another minute to start wrapping up your story maps and thinking about these questions. All right. Junte, do you mind going back to the presentation since you're already sharing? Oh,
Yeah, of course.
thank you. Awesome. And if you can go to the next slide.
Oh my goodness.
So to kind of just close this out and to give you some homework, while I may not be with you with the next session, there are some different key takeaways I would love you to think about, but we also have some homework for you to think about as you prepare for the next section. So some 3 key takeaways. Again, your story matters. For students that I work with now and in the previous years, they've always heard me say this because it truly does mean something. It means that you're co-creating the experience with others through your stories. Continued reflection is important when you're describing your story. Just because right now it might have been super easy for you to figure out which story map makes the most sense for you, doesn't mean that you're done. Like I said earlier, my story's still being written. It's a little bit easier for me now to share my story and be able to get up there and talk to others, but it doesn't mean that doesn't require continued reflection every day about who I am, what's the most important to me, and how I'm going to continue to navigate my own story. And the third takeaway that I hope you get from this is to use your support networks. You not only have an incredible team here with the Korean American Scholarship Foundation, you have other folks in your networks, your mentors, friends, family members, people that when I was in college that I didn't realize that were going to be so integral to my own story, and really lean on them. Ask them for help. Ask them those questions. Know that they're there to support you in all that you're doing. And so, like I said, you have some homework to consider as you move forward into the next session. The first is to choose one prompt. So again, there were those 3 prompts that were on the previous slide that were in the chat. Choose one of those in anticipation for the second session so that you can begin writing. Start a short 100 to 200 word sketch. We've done some brain mapping today. I hope that in those roughly 8 or so minutes, you were able to write some different aspects of your story down so that you can start to utilize that for your word sketch. And then also expand the sketch into a full story outline, whether that's outlining, your introduction, your first body paragraph of who you are and where your story begins, your second body paragraph, or your second part of your outline might talk a little bit more about the prompt itself. And then your third paragraph is really tying it all together. It doesn't have to be perfect. That's the most important thing, but at least starting to expand that sketch in and of itself. You'll also be receiving a recap email that we were sent with the guidebook that you already received. For those of you that joined us late, you'll get those via email along with other resources. You'll get an email for the pre-session about preparing for next week, August 17th. And then please take note of any feedback for the post-workshop survey that will also be sent out to you all. If you would love to connect, if you have other questions, if you would just like to say hi, please feel free to reach out via email. My email is Jenkins without the S, @umd.edu. I would also love to connect on LinkedIn. Again, any types of questions, if you would like to follow up, please feel free to do so. It was a wonderful time spending an evening my time with you all. Thank you all so much to the Korean American Scholarship Foundation, and best of luck to you all as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Angelina, for your time and just working on this session, leading it, facilitating it. I'm very thankful, and I'm sure our attendees are very thankful for your work in story mapping as well. We do have 2 more slides before we end the session, but we did want to let you know of our next event that the program committee is planning, which is our tech panel. I'm not sure, just from my memory, if any attendees here are going into tech or are thinking about tech or have any related fields. But if you are, or really if you're interested in learning about the tech experiences of 3 of our prominent members in KSF, we strongly encourage you to join us. Our tech panel is set for Wednesday, October 9th, 8 p.m. CST, 6 p.m. PST, and 9 p.m. EST. It's also on Hangul Day, so please celebrate with us in our focus on Korean innovation and global presence in tech. So yeah, we'll be joined by 3 incredible people. And then lastly, we do have many upcoming KSF events from our National Program Committee. If you check the virtual whiteboard here, Careers in Tech panel, October, the December, oh, they're not in order. September and October regional scholarship banquets, December fundraiser, January mental health panel, led by Kellen Yun, our president of the Southwestern Regional Chapter, I believe. Yes. March is our careers in medicine panel. May is our careers in law panel. And June is our international careers panel. So if you guys are interested in any of these events, we strongly encourage you to join. So
We
that is,
also have our
Mhm.
financial literacy panel in February that forgot to put on there. But yes, that's happening as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Jenny. Obviously, this year is full of exciting programming for you guys. We really want to give you just more than, supporting higher education. We want to add to your professional development, and really help you guys network. Like Angelina was talking about earlier, like KSF really is a community for you to lean back on. If you ever need support, if you ever need resources, we really are here for you. And that's why we are so excited to push this year of programming for you. Register through ksf.org, or we will be sending registration links, QR codes through our social media. All right, so that is the official end of the session, but